read, more to enjoy, more for us to be inspired by. I'm remembering the words of my favorite poet, Emily Dickinson, who wrote, "There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away." My writing tips section this time is really an extension of the writing tips section from the previous podcast, but you know what? This self-quarantine is extending, so why shouldn't I do the same thing? Last time, the tip was basically use this time wisely, write. You may have more free time right now than you've had in recent memory, so use that to get serious about your writing. And this time I'm going to expand and extend that message and just say, more so, keep writing. Get a draft done this month. There's no reason why you can't. If you're serious about this writing business, I'll give you a few more tips too. Don't write a book about a pandemic because one, I don't think there's going to be an audience for it anytime soon. And two, it is too soon. Instead, write the book in your heart. Write the book you've been thinking about for a long time but couldn't get started. You self-start. You never know what that will produce. And here, I'm going to share with you 2 fan letters, I guess, for want of a better word, letters I've gotten from readers. And you're going to think, what, again? This is really Ego Trip Podcast for Bill, isn't it? But I have a purpose, so bear with me. His first one came about 4.5 years ago, and here's what the correspondent says. It's a mother, and she writes, I was at a bookstore with my 2 sons, Joe, who has always been a reader, and Ty, who thought books were boring. I bought one of your books, and for some reason on the drive home, Ty started reading it. He couldn't put it down. Connected with Ben Kincaid. He has since read all your books and others as well. I had always wanted him to know the joy of reading and was sad that he didn't. You did what I could not. Thank you from the bottom of a mother's heart. I bet you can imagine how that affected me when I received that one. I mean, I would never have thought of recommending my thrillers to, get some kid to start reading, but it worked out that way. Every time we write a book, it's like throwing a pebble in a pond, and those concentric circles ripple out and go unexpected places and touch people's lives. You never know what's going to happen. Okay, here's one last one from a correspondent named David, who's in Ireland. Got this about 3 years ago. He says, Dear Mr. Bernhardt, last Monday, the 21st of July, I found myself admitted to the acute psychiatric ward in my local hospital in Ireland for 5 days. I am suffering from depression at the time, had an active death wish. The acute ward is for people who are a danger to themselves and others. I was calculated at being a high-risk danger to myself. While in the acute ward, you are not permitted access to your phone or electronics. I felt very lonely in there with some seriously ill people with psychotic delusions. I felt I could not relate to them, and without my phone and internet to keep me company, I asked one of the nurses if she had any books I could read. She gave me a copy of your book, Capital Murder, which may not be considered appropriate reading for a psychiatric patient, but it helped me so much to escape my thoughts and follow Ben Kincaid and Loving on their separate but equally thrilling adventures. I finished it over the course of about 24 hours, and I spent another day dissecting it in my head as to why I didn't see the twists and turns coming. I just wanted to write to you to let you know how much you helped me get through a difficult time in my life, and I will be forever grateful for that. Wow. Do I really need to say anything more? My friends, my red sneaker writers, books are essential. Books make us kinder, gentler, more empathetic people. And books remind us that we are not alone. So use this time and tell your story. I am thrilled to tell you that on this podcast, my interview is with the extraordinary New York Times-bestselling author William Bernhardt, whose Peter Fallon historical novels and others have sent him to the top of the charts again and again over the course of a 4-decade writing career. I've had the pleasure of knowing Bill Martin for many years now. He's been a keynote speaker out at WriterCon. I was completely amused by his Facebook post a few days ago. He posted a photograph of his office, which is his desk in a gorgeous Boston area home, and it's just him. And he said, social distancing, I've been doing that for about 40 years. Obviously, this is an amazingly talented writer. So I asked him if he would share with my listeners some of his advice, tips, recommendations about writing. Here's what he said. William Martin, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hello, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing great. All right. Traditional first question. If you could give aspiring writers one piece of writing advice, what would it be?
It would be the 30% rule. 30% of what people tell you about your work, whether you're going to workshops or talking to friends or your wife or your husband or whoever, 30% of what they say to you, you want to slap yourself in the forehead and say, why didn't I think of that? 30% of what they say to you, you should say, yeah, I think I'll go home and I'll think about that idea. That's a nice bit of feedback. Thank you. And 30% of it you throw in the wastebasket because these people who are offering you well-meaning advice usually don't really understand what it is that you're trying to do. And the extra 10% is the margin for error. What you have to do is develop a sense of your own internal critic about your own work. And if you can do that, you'll be well on your way to becoming a writer.
Well, it seems to be working for you because you have had a spectacular career since, how long's it been? When was Back Bay published?
Back Bay was published 40 years ago this spring, 1980.
Well, you got me beat by a decade, so I'm impressed.
Yeah. And the great thing about it for me is that book is still in print, and it just came out 2 months ago as an audiobook for the first time.
For the first time, really? That must be fantastic.
Yeah, it was. Because, every time something good happens with something that you've written, as you well know, those footprints that you left behind 30 or 40 years ago, somebody has just come along and swept them out a little bit so that they're not filling up with sand just yet. And people are still able to access your work and experience the world as you may have hoped to experience it or have them experience it way back 40 years ago.
Well, and audiobooks, of course, are all the rage now.
Yeah.
So how timely, how perfect to introduce that book to a new audience.
Yeah. It was really great. All 11 of my books are now on audio. They brought them all out. And I had in the past, I had books on audio, on tape, and I write long novels. A novel I wrote about the history of the Navy, which was called Annapolis. I think it's like 24 tapes, 24 90-minute tapes. It's that long. And
not long ago, I showed my kids the audiobook of one of my early books, which is also a bunch of cassette tapes. And they're like, what's that? That's not an audiobook. What do you do with it?
Yeah. Well,
when I hear you talk about this 30% rule, I think, wow, what enormous self-confidence, because I get insecure about it if I hear one person. I mean, I'm not saying I would necessarily do it, but I would certainly give thought to any feedback I get from anyone.
Yeah, yeah. It may be bad advice. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The other thing you need to do as you develop your own critical faculties about these things is recognize that some of the people giving you advice probably know a little bit more about what they're telling you and give you better reasons for it than some of the other people. And I developed this skill when I was in film school. I went to the USC Film School after I graduated from college. I went out there.
And that would be from Harvard, right?
Yeah. And at USC, I took a screenwriting class that was run by a famous old Hollywood story editor, a guy by the name of Irwin Blacker. And he had been the story editor on the famous old Bonanza series, you might remember.
Sure.
And he ran his class as if it was a pitch session at a studio where you sat down with your screenplay idea and presented it to the class, and then everybody went around and gave their opinions and their advice about it as if they were studio executives. And you learned very quickly, sitting in a room like that, who the people were who were giving you good advice and who the people were who were giving you advice simply because it was expected of them to give you advice. Mm-hmm. And that was how I began to develop that particular skill, I think. Mm-hmm. And of course, you can apply it even to critics. The critics that give you nasty reviews just for the sake of being nasty, and I've had those in the course of my career, are the ones that you ignore. You develop a thick skin about them, and then there are other criticisms that are more constructive and thoughtful, and you give them more serious thought because you recognize that they're coming from a different place.
I hope everybody recognizes that. On Amazon book pages now, when you click for more, the header will always have, here's a good review, here's a bad one. Mm-hmm. And it was actually my young son, Ralph, who, for whatever was my most recent book, saw this bad review that complained that they didn't like my book because it had too many 4-syllable words. And he said, Dad, that's the one you want to be your bad review.
That's right.
It's not really a bad review. So we got everybody we know to like that review, and sure enough, it showed up at the top of the page.
That's great.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There are so many ways to be reviewed across these broad platforms, and yet at the same time, the professional reviewers that we looked to 30 and 40 years ago, they're all gone because the newspapers have eliminated their book pages, which is a very disconcerting development. But I'll take whatever kind of reviews I can, as long as they spell my name right and get the title of the book right.
Well, let's talk about that. I noticed that, for instance, on Bound for Gold, you've got a ton of endorsements from really top-notch authors and prestigious journals. But I'm not sure in the modern era blurbs matter anymore. Do you think they help?
I don't really know, Bill. I'm always proud and honored to get good reviews and good commentary by my peers in the business. And I am sure that there are people in bookstores or shopping online who pick up a book and they say, wow, well, so-and-so said something nice about this. It must be a good book. And so agents and publishers have more and more turned to this blurbing process as a means by which to generate excitement out there in the world of the buyers. First of all, those individuals in independent bookstores, and then in the larger chains, such as those that remain, who are going to have some impact over how your book gets out into the world. And if they're the ones that say, okay, if so-and-so said something good about this book, then we'll take X number of copies as an order versus X minus 5.